di taka junada, daddy get it from di taka junada, daddy get it from taka junada, daddy get it from da, daddy get it from da, daddy get it from da, di taka junada.
Hey guys, hope you're fine. Hello and welcome. Didier Werner speaking. In this video, I would like to shed some light on a specific Konnakol which I encountered twice in very different settings. Once with notable jazz drummer Steve Smith, and the second time with also notable jazz musician but guitarist this time, John McLaughlin. So this Konnakol is really fun to play with. It's a really amazing one, I think, rhythmically speaking, and also it's interesting to sort of try to figure out the way it's constructed rhythmically and also why it sounds like it sounds musically. So this is the purpose of this video. So like I said, the first time I encountered this specific Konnakol was in a video on YouTube with drummer Steve Smith, who actually tells the Konnakol but doesn't play the drums in this particular instance. He is accompanied by an amazing young drummer, also Jimmy Haslip, a former Yellow Jacket bass player, and a guitar player as well. If you don't know the video I'm talking about, I've provided a link to it below this video in the comments. So I urge you to have a look at that video first in order to get acquainted with the Konnakol in question. Anyways, it's huge fun again to look at these guys perform that thing, and this is the first part of the video which is of interest to us. Afterwards, there are a number of other Konnakol sequences which are also extremely interesting to listen to and perhaps also to analyze, but we're going to concentrate on the first part of the video in question. I don't know where this particular Konnakol comes from actually. I don't know if it's Steve Smith who authored it in the first place, or maybe it comes from maybe it's a standard exercise in Indian music schools. I have no idea, and I'm interested if you know more about the origins of this Konnakol. But anyway, I'm going to call this version the original version because this is the very first one I've encountered. So after having been faced for the first time with this particular Konnakol, I thought it was so much fun that I decided, and that was again several years ago, to simply learn it by heart just for the fun of it. But the very funny thing, and this is what actually triggers the idea of making this video, is that it's only recently that I had the surprise of hearing it again in a completely different context. And the context in question is, as of today, the latest and great album from John McLaughlin entitled Liberation Time. On Liberation Time there is a song entitled Lockdown Blues, and at the end of Lockdown Blues there is a rhythmic break, and in that break there is a Konnakol sequence which corresponds almost exactly to the original version of the Konnakol we're talking about in this video, but with also small differences which at the beginning I had probably a hard time understanding. So I couldn't quite figure. I was surprised to discover the exact same Konnakol played by John McLaughlin instead of Steve Smith. But also I couldn't quite figure out why it was different and how exactly it was different in construction. And so I decided to not only analyze the first one, the original version, but also the differences between John McLaughlin's version and Steve Smith's version, and this is what we are going to study now. Let's start by telling the Konnakol the entirely once, and then we're going to look at the transcript. So the exact syllables I'm using are not exactly the same as in the original version, but this is really a detail, doesn't matter much. And by the way, on Lockdown Blues, the syllables that probably the drummer who's telling the Konnakol doesn't use exactly the same syllables either, so it really doesn't matter. So the whole thing goes like this: 1, 2, 3, 4. Tadi takajuneta, tadigena tadi kajuneta, tadigena takajuneta, tadigena tadi, tadigena tadi, tadigena tadi takajuneta, tadigena tadi kajuneta, tadigena takajuneta, ti tadigena tadi, ti tadigena tadi, ti tadigena tadi takajuneta, tadigena tadi kajuneta, tadigena takajuneta, tadi tadigena tadi, tadi tadigena tadi, tadi tadigena kota. So as you can see, it seems to fall right on its feet. But the construction, the rhythmic construction of the whole sequence is quite complicated and actually quite subtle as well. So we're going to analyze it in details right now. So in order to clarify and make it easier to understand the analysis of this Konnakol sequence, I have transcribed the whole thing in rhythmic notation, and I'm providing you with a free PDF that you can find again in the comments below the video. If you listen carefully to the Konnakol in question, you will eventually figure out, and that is the first interesting thing to note, that the whole sequence is actually constructed out of a phrase which is repeated 3 times in a row, only with subtle differences every time, but we're going to get back to that later on. So the original phrase goes like this: Tadi takajuneta, tadige nakota dikajuneta, tadige nakota kajuneta, tadige netadi, tadige netadi, tadige nako. And stop like that, right in the middle of something that appears to be a random position in a measure, right in the middle of a measure. And this is actually perhaps the first interesting to note in terms of how this Konnakol sequence is constructed, which is that the end of the phrase, which is repeated 3 times in a row, doesn't sound at all like a musical end of a sentence, right? So musically speaking, this is not the end of the phrase. The phrase ends later on, and it rather ends, in my opinion, on tadige netadi, tadige netadi, tadige nakotadi takajuneta. And that sounds like a conclusion. But that conclusion actually comes later on, after the first phrase, or the second one for that matter, has ended, and the next one has begun. So, and this is what I think is quite subtle in the construction of this specific Konnakol. Everything behaves as if there was an overlap between the end of a sequence, of a cycle, and the beginning of the next one. So technically, the sequence ends at something which is seemingly a random place, but the musical phrase, the ending of the phrase, musically speaking, actually contains the beginning of the next cycle. As you can see on the transcript, I have used voltas to precisely indicate the extent of the first, the second, and the third repetition of the phrase. Let's now have a closer look at the first one, for instance, which again is repeated almost exactly the same twice afterwards. The phrase itself, the repeated phrase, is constructed out of a part, the beginning, which doesn't change across the 2 repetitions, and an ending which itself contains small and subtle differences from between the first and the second and the third repetition. So the part which doesn't change is tadi takajuneta, tadige nakota dikajuneta, tadige nakota kajuneta. That part is repeated exactly in the same fashion thrice. Now it becomes more interesting to look at the ending, because the ending contains subtle differences between the first, the second, and the third repetition. So the original ending goes like this: tadige netadi, tadige netadi, tadige nakota. So rhythmically speaking, it is exactly the same pattern, which is also repeated thrice. It's only the syllables which change. Tadige netadi, tadige netadi, tadige nakota. So like I said, when the original phrase is repeated 3 times in a row, the beginning of the phrase doesn't change. It is repeated exactly as is, but the endings, which themselves are repeated 3 times, contain subtle differences from one iteration to the next. So if you look now at a transcript of only the endings in question, the differences between the 3 occurrences become apparent. So the first time, the ending, which again is repeated 3 times, and only the syllables change, goes like this: tadigene tadi, tadigene tadi, tadigene sorry, tadigene tadi, tadigene tadi, tadigenakota. The second time it goes di tadigene tadi, di tadigene tadi, di tadigenakota. And the third and final time it goes ta di tadigene tadi, ta di tadigene tadi, ta di tadigenakota. So as you can see, the first ending is kept, as is the second and the third time, but there is something which is pushed at the beginning of the ending, so that the first time we have this additional di, which amounts in terms of duration to an eighth note, and the third time the addition is ta di, which amounts to a duration of a quarter note. And again, all those things are repeated 3 times in every repetition of the original phrase. I hope I'm making sense here. The beauty of it is that, again, all those phrases which appear to, from a musical point of view, stop at random places and which do not correspond to an exact number of measures or even beats for that matter, when you concatenate everything together, and of course, I believe it was intentional right from the start, everything falls back on its feet in a very consistent way. And to be even more specific, the whole thing lasts for exactly 48 beats in total, which actually corresponds to 12 measures in a 4/4 time signature. So this is, even from a mathematical point of view, the construction of that thing is quite beautiful. Okay, let's now switch to the version from Lockdown Blues by John McLaughlin. So I'm going to start by just telling this version once completely. So it goes like this. Tadi takajuneta, tadigenakota dikajuneta, tadigenakota kajuneta, tadigenetadi, tadigenetadi, tadigenakota ta tadi takajuneta, tadigenakota dikajuneta, tadigenakota kajuneta, di tadigenetadi, di tadigenetadi, di tadigenakota ta tadi takajuneta, tadigenakota dikajuneta, tadigenakota kajuneta, ta di tadigenetadi, ta di tadigenetadi, ta di tadigenakota. So as you can see, it also falls back right on its feet on a specific, on an exact beat. As a matter of fact, in the song Lockdown Blues, the tempo is much faster, and like I said earlier, the syllables are different. But I don't know if you've noticed, unless you're already quite familiar with it, the Konnakol is extremely similar to the original one by Steve Smith, but still it contains another subtle difference. And this is that specific difference which I originally had a hard time understanding, and also I was wondering why doing something slightly different at all. So what is exactly the difference between Steve Smith's original version and John McLaughlin's version of this Konnakol sequence? The difference is in the ending of the first and the second cycle. More specifically, I have, as you can see here, provided a transcript of the original endings and the John McLaughlin endings next to each other. So to be extremely specific, the first phrase in the original version goes tadigenetadi, tadigenetadi, tadigenakota. And in the John McLaughlin's version, it goes tadigenetadi, tadigenetadi, tadigenakota, ta, ta. So there is actually a quarter note which is added at the end, not for the 3 repetitions of the ending phrase, but only the last one, tadigenakota, ta, ta. The second time, the original phrase goes di tadigenetadi, di tadigenetadi, di tadigenakota. And in the John McLaughlin's version, it goes di tadigenetadi, di tadigenetadi, di tadigenakota, ta, ta. So there is also a ta, ta, which is added at the end. So as you can see, the differences do not amount to that much, actually, because only, and by the way, I didn't mention that, but the final phrase is exactly the same as in the original version. So all in all, you have one additional quarter note at the end of the first cycle, and one additional quarter note at the end of the second cycle. So it's 2 quarter notes on top of the original version in terms of duration. If you look at the script for the John McLaughlin's version, you will notice that it doesn't seem to fall back on its feet in a way which would be as nice as in the original version, because yes, it falls back on an exact beat, ta, but at the same time it falls back right in the middle of the 13th measure. So the interesting question is, why does it end like that, apparently in the middle of something which looks a bit weird? And we're now ready to actually reveal the secret behind this modification, and the secret lies in time signatures. The hint that we can get from this whole thing is that, remember, in the original Konnakol version we had exactly 48 beats, amounting to 12 measures in a 4/4 time signature. But if you listen carefully to Lockdown Blues, the John McLaughlin song, the time signature is not 4/4, but it's a 5/4, so 5 beats per measure. Now, like I've just said, the John McLaughlin version of the Konnakol has 2 quarter notes added to the original version, which was 48 quarter notes, 48 beats. So all in all, it amounts to not 48 anymore, but 50 beats in total. And guess what? 50 beats corresponds exactly to 10 measures in a 5/4 time signature. So let me switch here the 4/4 time signature to 5/4/1, and voila, it becomes magically consistent with 10 measures in a 5/4 time signature. So I believe that is the original intention behind the modification of Steve Smith's original Konnakol. It simply has been modified to fit the 5/4 time signature of Lockdown Blues, and it's also huge fun to play with that slightly modified version. So that's it, guys. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Try to learn this Konnakol. It's really fun to play with. It's a good exercise to practice your rhythmic skills. I hope you've enjoyed this analysis. Bye bye, see you next time.